Guys, welcome to the First Responder Playbook. I have John Guaspari with me tonight. John's written, man, it's a Monday somewhere. Written 7 books, done a lot of leadership training with a lot of big companies. Like normal, I'm going to let him introduce himself because I want him to do himself justice. So, John, the stage is yours.
Well, thanks, Brett. I appreciate the opportunity. Um, yeah, I've been around for a while. I started out my career as an aerospace engineer a long time ago, but quickly realized that was not the career for me. And the American flying public should thank me that I decided to move on. And I moved into other work I tried for a few years to work as a freelance writer, got a few things published, was unable to make a living at it. So I got a job at Honeywell in the Boston area. I now live in the Boston area. It's where I've lived. I grew up in New York, but I've lived in the Boston area ever since I got out of school. Um, and I worked for Honeywell, where I was kind of, the way I think of it, as like a Swiss Army knife of a writer. Anything that needed writing, I would write. Product descriptions, marketing brochures, executive speeches. If it needed writing, I would write it. And the best thing about that job is it's where I met the woman who would become my wife. And and I moved on from that job to another company, and it was while I was at that other company in a similar kind of position that I um, I noticed something about just the way a lot of leaders went about their work, that they weren't terribly effective at communicating with the people who work for them. That if they wanted to truly motivate people, the way they went about it was not good, was ineffective. So I wrote a very, very short book in my spare time. I told my boss, I'm going to do this on my own in my spare time. So, don't worry, it's not going to get in the way of my other work. And I wrote it, and I was amazed that I found an agent, and amazed that I found a publisher, and really amazed that it sold like gangbusters. And that came in very handy because soon after it got published, I got laid off. Not because of the book, it was just because of the realities of the business. But that did come in very handy because we had just bought a new house. And so that big new house with a big new mortgage, and I had a newly big wife. She was 7 months pregnant with our second child. And my book was out there. And I began to get phone calls from people saying, do you do speeches on this kind of thing? Do you do seminars? And up to then, I'd been saying, no, I have a job. But that day, the day after I got laid off, I got a phone call from someone said, do you do speeches about this sort of thing? I said, why, yes, I do. And they said, by any chance, are you available on, this was in August, so on, I don't know, October 16th. And this was in pre-internet days. So I got some blank pieces of paper and riffled them in front of the phone and said, let me look at my calendar to see if I'm free. Well, I had the whole next 10 years free as far as I knew. So, well, yes, that day's open. And that sent me down a road which I continue to go down for the next 30 years of consulting on various technical topics. But the common theme throughout all of them was, how do you communicate more effectively to get people more highly, and the word that gets used in the business world, more highly engaged in their work? And engagement, it means in that context, is getting people to give the incremental bit of effort and energy on the job. Because if you don't do it right, they're not inclined to do it. Now, I imagine first responders are pretty motivated people, or they wouldn't be doing that kind of work.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I would think, though, that if you don't do the communication part right, you can do some things that might demotivate, cause a little bit of demotivation. You're not going to turn them off completely because they are motivated people, but you might cause them to be at the margin a little bit demotivated, and then that would be a terrible thing to do. In the business world, it often goes the other way. A lot of people are just kind of going through the motions, and you need to build them up.
I actually have a story that actually I feel fits perfectly with that.
Okay.
Um, I had a supervisor that, man, I swear, me and my best friend would do the exact same thing, and he would get a commendation, and I'd get wrote up. Um, for whatever reason, me and that supervisor just did not mesh up very well. And when was on his shift, it just demotivated me because he didn't know how to communicate with me. He was an older Marine from the 80s, and I wouldn't say that I'm of the younger generation anymore, but a different generation than him.
Yeah.
And there was a clear, and I recognized that there was a clear communication gap. And I tried so hard to fix that. And after a while, I finally just gave up because he wouldn't willing to work with me. And I gave up on trying to communicate with him because I knew what the issue was. There was a generational gap. He was ex-military. I'm not. Um, and I just could not bridge that gap. And so finally, that's exactly right. I got demotivated and I gave up. Now, I didn't stop working because deep down inside, I have a calling to go out there and serve the public. But I guarantee I wasn't as proactive,
Right.
going out and trying to find stuff when I was on shift with him.
Right. I had the last 10 years of my career. I was a consultant for about 30 years, but the last 10 years, um, I'd always told my wife, after years and years of travel as a consultant, I always told my wife, before I retire, I want to go back to work for a company to see uh, if the stuff I've been preaching really ticks. Because as a consultant, you fly in, you might work with a company for a few weeks, for a few months, maybe even a year, but then you get to leave. I wanted to see if I could go in and go deep within a company as just an employee. Because as a consultant, you also have a little bit of cachet. The saying in the consulting business is the expert is the guy who has the airplane ticket in his pocket. You could come in as the guy who flies in like the hot shot or whatever.
Yep.
And some people roll their eyes when they say it with good reason. Uh, and and so I got a job with a major defense contractor. Now, these defense contractors, the management of these defense contractors tend to be populated by former military. So at one point while working there, I had responsibility for the leadership development program of a very large chunk of the business. And so one of the people that I was counseling was a retired admiral. And good guy, well-intentioned guy, smart guy, said to me, John, I know what I want done. I think I'm clear about what I want done. I tell people what I want done. It doesn't get done in the way I want it done or as fast as I want it done. And I remember saying to him, well, Bill, you got to realize that people don't do what you want them to do in the way you want them to do it. You can't have them thrown in federal prison anymore. you, you've got to use some influence techniques. You can't just say do it or you're going into the brig, you know. And and also you don't want to play occasionally, not into the brig, but occasionally, yes, if you're a boss, occasionally you might want to just simply use your authority to get something done. But if that's your go-to move, you're not going to be very effective as a leader.
Right.
You need to know how to influence people. So it was because of that and examples like that that over the years I learned a fair amount about what worked and what didn't work, and that's what you mentioned that I had written 7 books. As a matter of fact, I just published my 8th book. Uh,
That's awesome.
And it's a very short book, and its title is "If Engagement is the What, Then Respect is the How." And what it's saying, if what you want is to have your employees more highly engaged, then about 85% of the battle is treating them with respect. And I don't simply say that, but I talk about what that really means and how you go about doing it, and why, if you don't do that, you're going to run into those kind of roadblocks and pitfalls.
That's so true, and that's actually something that for the longest time I felt like in the first responder world that they didn't recognize is it was always, well, that's the way we've always done it, and that's the way we're going to continue to do it. And I feel like maybe in the last 5 to 10 years, it's finally started to come out a little bit of like, hey, if you have 5 people on your shift as a supervisor, you've got 5 different personalities that you have to manage that probably have 5 different interests in law enforcement. And you kind of have to, it's kind of like baking a cake. You got to put all the ingredients together to make a good shift.
It's
And
fine. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's slowly getting better, but I mean, it's definitely taking a long time.
It's 5 different interests in law enforcement and 5 different life stories. Like, again, the fellow you had on your last episode had triplets crying in the background.
Yes.
I'm 75 years old. You aren't going to hear any triplets crying in the background in my life. What you see over there is a cat. That's a sentence I never thought I would utter. I have a cat. My my wife passed away 5 years ago, and I inherited her. Actually, I have 3 cats. That's an even less likely sentence I thought I would ever. But I don't have triplets. So I mean, I have a very different life. I head up I play a lot of golf. I'm on the board of governors at my golf course. I head up a committee, and I'm trying to pull together a meeting for my committee. And I'm thinking, well, I'll just pull everybody together at 10 o'clock in the morning. And then wait a minute. People still work. I can't, I
Yep.
can't just assume everybody can show up at 1 in the afternoon like I can. Why
Yep.
can't they? And I mean, that's a silly example, but it is and it isn't. It's just taking a minute to realize, oh, yeah, they have their own lives, they have their own issues. Everybody and everybody has a story to tell. Everybody has some stuff that's going on in their life that's tough, that's that may or may not be any of your business, but you need to acknowledge that people are living real lives, and you got to give people a little bit of slack in the rope so that they can live there, all that stuff. And that's, I'm almost embarrassed that I that this stuff that, I mean, I'm pointing over here. This is my book here, the new one. And that it's very basic, but I don't hear anybody else saying it quite as directly. That just, I mean, the definition of respect that I offer in the book is giving due consideration to the other, to
Yep.
others. That's all. Others is a loaded word these days. Politically, you get into a lot of trouble if you say others. Oh, you're trying to other that person. I'm sure you're aware of all that
Oh
stuff.
yeah.
I think I'm okay, because my definition of other in this context is everybody who isn't you. I'm not talking about a category. I'm not talking about a demographic set. I'm talking about just anybody else. Giving due consideration to others. What you say or don't say, what you do or don't do, did you stop and think about how it affected others? That's all.
Yep.
And it's a simple notion. It's very hard to do. And you'll have a much higher chance of doing it if you, I joke around with people. I say, if you stop, if you take a beat, maybe take a shot of scotch and think about it. And that, you're more likely to yeah, okay, stop and think. That's all. Just think about it. Did you stop and think? I, I I have in my book, I give an example of someone who of a an employee who gets an email from a boss, and the employee had sent something to the boss via email that he thought was in response to what the boss had requested, and the boss had said simply, "Not what I was looking for," with 4 exclamation points. And now this poor guy now gets this. Well, what's he supposed to do with this? Does he go see the boss? Well, if he knows the boss well, maybe he can. He can go and say, "Hey, you having a bad day? What is this?" But if you don't know him well, maybe he can't. You know.
Yep.
Uh, but if the boss had taken a minute and said, he could have said, "Not what I was looking for," but then added a little bit. I thought we were going to talk about X, Y, and Z. Now the person, no, okay, now you've given me something to go on. But because he just blew off steam, he sent that guy into a swivet. Maybe that guy had to cancel his staff meeting with his people, and that has a ripple effect throughout the organization. They had to rearrange their schedules because he hadn't given due consideration, because he had been disrespectful. And if you're not being respectful of people, why would you think down the road they're going to give incremental effort and energy? Why would you think they're going to be more highly engaged?
Exactly.
It's I was talking to somebody about this the other day. They said, "Oh, it's very easy." I said, "It's not easy. It's simple. There's a difference. Something can be simultaneously simple and difficult. The notion of giving consideration is a simple notion, but it's difficult to do in the midst of a day when you're very busy and you've got your own stresses and strains, and maybe you're getting flack from your boss, but you got a better chance of doing it if you keep that in mind. That's all I propose.
I agree wholeheartedly. And that's, and you say it's not a hard topic, and it is with how simple it is, but a
No,
lot
it
of
is
times
hard. It's difficult. It's a simple notion, but it's difficult to do.
that's what I was going to get at is it's it's something that people just don't grasp for whatever reason, you know?
I, I think some people they they I think some people, well, here these are the worst cases, think if they're higher than, they look at an organizational chart and they think, well, if I'm here and you're here, I don't need to worry about that. I need to worry about this, up, not down. And that's cancer
Yep.
on an organization.
What I was reading some of the questions that intrigue you, and first responders, I mean, I'm not going to say they're unique, but we have a very paramilitaristic structure. We have
Yeah.
our line supervisors, and then they have, probably like the next level above them are the ones that, maybe run the shifts or run the districts, and then you have your administration level supervisors. What's the one leadership skill that matters the most at each level?
At each level or at all levels?
All levels.
I I would think listening, and first cousin to listening is empathy, and knowing, and again, I've said to people, giving due consideration to the other does not mean you're there to throw rose petals in people's paths. You got a business to run. You've got a first responder organization, and that is, there are times when it's literally life and death, and
Yep.
they're in time to go through all kinds of niceties. So I'm
Yep.
not suggesting that. That's why the word due, D-U-E, is in there. Giving appropriate consideration to the other, due consideration to the other. But I just think, I, that one of the things you'll hear people talk about, and one of the things I say in the book, I offer a first cousin to respect is trust. And the definition of trust that I offer is confident expectation. That if everybody knows what to expect, that means time has been taken to set those expectations. And is confident in that, and is confident in what will happen if expectations aren't met. Then you can have trust. So, for example, if someone in good faith uh, uh, does something, doesn't meet expectations, what's going to happen is their boss going to say, all right, that didn't quite work out. Let's talk about why that didn't work out. What did you overlook? What might we have done differently? Let's think about that. That's one approach. The other approach would be the boss is going to rip his face off. Now, again, in some circumstances, the rip your face off response might be the necessary one if there's no time to have this soulful searching and comparing of notes,
Right.
but confident expectations is the definition of trust that I suggest. And one of the things I say to people is, you should not trust people presumptively. I don't know. I met you, Brent, 25 minutes ago,
Right.
virtually. If you and I were working on a project and I was a project leader and you said to me, "Oh, I'll have that for you by next Friday at 2:00," I'm not going to say, "Okay, good." I'm not going to check. I am going to check. Doesn't mean I think you're a bad guy. Doesn't mean I have any reason to think you won't do it. But I don't know. We don't
Exactly.
have any experience together. On the other hand, if you and I work together for 5 years and you've come through every single time without fail, and you say, "I'll have it for you by next Friday at 2:00," I'll say, "Go with God. Do it. We're good." And so that's why I say trust should not be given presumptively, but it can be earned. And so over time, that person who at first I might have said, I'm going to check, over time, okay, now that person has earned that level of trust that I had. Respect, on the other hand, is different. Respect must always be given presumptively. I can think of nothing more arrogant or pompous than saying, "You must earn my respect." Earn. Well, who the blank are you to say that I have to earn your? I,
Exactly.
I, you see what I'm saying? Respect's different. And the other thing that makes respect different from all these other things is respect is something that I, John, and you, Brent, have complete control over. I have complete control over whether or not I show respect to everybody else I work with, whether it's the president of the company or the guy who comes and empties my wastebasket or everybody else in between. I have complete control over that. And if people who work for me see me showing respect to everybody up and down and across the organization, they're more likely to manifest the same kind of respect. So it's coming back to the question you asked me a while ago. That's I think that the thing that leaders can do it's listen and empathy and manifesting respect is the thing that's probably most essential, because that propagates through an organization, and the lack of it does too. People
Yep.
pick up on this is a place where I like this. People are respected. They also sense, I don't like the way people are treated here. And so there's another word that's used all the time: empowerment. You hear that word?
Yes.
I in a auditorium and listened to. There was a large company. They were getting the results of a survey they had done of their employees, thousands and thousands of employees. It was a big company. And they asked their employees the extent to which they felt empowered. And the results were very disappointing. So the president of the company got up after the results had been reported and there was some discussion about it. The president of the company got up and he said, you could tell he was this, he shook his head and he said, and the people in the room were his direct reports and their direct reports. So these were high-level people in the company. He said, I need you people to understand something. You are all empowered. I now need you to go back and tell your people, make sure your people understand that they are all empowered. And I was sitting in the back of the room, and I could, from where I was sitting, I could see a guy in the front row as one of his vice presidents. He started to put his hand up, and then he pulled it down. And then there was a break. And so during the break, I got a hold of that guy. And I said, you wanted to say something when he said, he told people that he wanted you to go and tell people they were empowered. And he said, yeah, I did. I said, what was it you wanted to say? He said, what I wanted to say was, we could tell people they're empowered until we're blue in the face. But if they don't feel empowered, they're not empowered. And I said, well, why didn't you say it? He said, oh, no, too risky. Think of the irony of that. He didn't feel empowered to tell his boss that the way he was approaching empowerment was wrong. He was not empowered to say that's not the way to do empowerment. And the definition of empowerment that I suggest in the book is a feeling of safety while exercising judgment on the job. A feeling of safety while exercising judgment. So if you're on the job and you're just going down a checklist, you don't need to exercise judgment. But if you're going down the checklist and partway through you think, maybe I ought to deviate from this checklist a little bit, now you're exercising judgment. Now you're going to ask yourself, well, what will happen if I do that and things go south? Now we're back to the trust thing. Will my boss rip my face off, or will he sit me down and say, all right, you did your best, but and all these things fit together. I mean, the way I put it together in the book is respect will lead to trust, trust will lead to empowerment, empowerment will lead to engagement. But it all starts with respect, and respect, of all those four things, respect is the one thing that everybody has complete control over. Those other things require other people doing things. You have complete control over whether or not you give respect to the other. And that's the little soapbox that I'm on these days.
I love that. And that's so true. That's actually very spot on. I love that. I I have something that really piqued my interest on here. Um, this is how should leaders measure engagement if not through surveys? Um, because in the first responder world, I feel like every once in a while these chiefs, especially at bigger agencies, put out these surveys to their unions or whoever and say, "Hey, fill these out. Tell us what's going right. Tell us what's going wrong." And you might get maybe 10% of them to participate. And the ones that are usually participating are the ones that are like, man, this is the best place ever. Um, what's your take on that? Like, what's your take on, if not surveys, like, what's the best way to get engagement or measure engagement?
Surveys are fine for what they are, if you recognize that. If you're
Okay.
only getting 10% response, that should tell you, that is telling you something important right there.
Yep.
Beyond surveys, if it's possible for you to do focus groups, uh, those are harder to do. Surveys are easy to do. As we speak, today is Monday the 23rd. I mentioned I belong in my golf club. Uh, I, I, I'm responsible for our annual member survey. We launched our annual member survey today. So I just checked before I got on this call with you. We have 81 responses so far. It's fine. It's fine. And it will give us very valuable information. We've been doing this survey for 10 years. We compare it year to year. It's very valuable. We know what it is, but we also know what it is. I also got an email from a friend of mine who sends me the same email every year when the survey goes out. John, why do we keep doing the survey when we know nothing will come of it? And I always send him the same response back. Paul, you're wrong. We do listen to the results. Changes do happen as a result of it. Then he writes back, well, what are the changes? And I write back, I'm not going to get into that with you, Paul. Have a nice evening. And then he, you know, because, but surveys are fine for what they are. I would recommend uh, if you can manage a way to do focus groups, that gives you richer, meatier kinds of information. Um, I mean, engagement. You should see things like employee retention rates. Now, you probably have pretty high retention rates, but I don't know how big of that issue that is with you. But absenteeism should go down. Uh, if people are more engaged, they want to come to work.
Yep.
Uh, those are the signs of higher levels of engagement. There aren't the things you will see in corporate America like profitability up and productivity up. Well, there are probably some productivity measures that you could come up with. I don't know what they would be offhand, but profitability, no. Um,
I would say on productivity wise, a lot of guys just making contact with people that are out there committing crimes and traffic violations, engaging with the public. Guys that are more productive will get out and do that on a more regular basis. And then guys that are kind of checked out, they're usually just taking their calls and going home, maybe checking
I
business
see.
properties.
So they're not as proactive.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, yeah,
that
and
that would that would be how I would measure it in the first responder world because um, at least on the cop side. Um, but yeah, I like focus groups. Would you? Let me ask you this: on the focus group side, would you break it up with just like general officers and then frontline supervisors, or would you mix them all together? If you're coming from the administration down, how would you do that?
I guess it would depend on what your objectives are for the focus group. My gut reaction would be to keep it at the same level, not mix
Yep,
it, because that might stifle discussion if you have
yep,
it cross, above, different levels.
yep,
If you want to get one level talking in the different levels, and then maybe have the results of those and circulate those levels, and then bring together vertical cuts.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know. I don't know enough about it, but there are various ways to do it. Um, those are, those two are tricky to do, because you do that, and then you wind up getting the notes from Pauls of the world saying, "All right, we did that. Now what?" And and once you ask the question, you're sort of uh, you feel obliged to do something with what you found out, and so I don't want to be too glib about a response to that.
That's fair. Um, so if, I don't want to tie you up all night, but I've had a blast talking to you. I love that. I'm actually working on my doctorate in leadership right now.
Oh, great.
Um, and I love just listening to you talk about these different ideas, because like the academic side of me is like, I could sit here and listen to him talk all night.
Oh, you
um,
don't want you got to be careful what you wish for.
right. So if somebody wants to, get in contact with you, can you give them a little details about your website, where to find your books?
My website is my name. My name's on the screen. My website is John Guaspari, but all one word, no space between the N and the G. JohnGuaspari.com. That's my website, and my books are on the website. And along with, I over the years have written hundreds and hundreds of articles. They're not all there, but I've culled through and have a number of articles on the website. I also, to keep myself sane, back in the late 90s and early 2000s, I was on the road a lot. And to stay sane, um, I wrote a weekly humor column for my local newspaper.
That's awesome.
Do you know Dave Barry?
I don't.
Okay, he's the best humor columnist in America for many, many years. He
Okay.
wrote for the Miami Herald, syndicated in 500 papers. He was my hero. Anyway,
Okay.
anyway, anyway.
I'm sure I've read them at some point, because
Uh,
I was on the tail end of the newspaper era.
okay. He still shows up. You'll still catch him on websites. Um, he so I wrote a weekly humor column, and I have a pretty good sampling of the humor columns that I wrote on my website as well, which I think are fun to read. At least I think they're fun. Here's a real quick thing. Real quick thing. I don't want to bore you too much with this, but Dave Barry, very, very funny writer. I read him for years, and he occasionally would write about. He had a bloodhound named Ernest. Ernest would show up in his columns from time to time. Well, we wound up with a basset hound named Ernie. So I wrote a column once that mentioned Ernie the basset hound. And I remember thinking, huh. And this was pre email days. I printed out a copy of the column with Ernie, in which I mentioned Ernie. I actually wrote a fan letter to Dave. Wrote a letter. Remember those?
Yes.
I had to put it in an envelope and put a stamp on it. And in the letter, I said, Dave, just want to say thanks for many years of many laughs. I know you write about your bloodhound named Ernest. I wrote the attached column in which I mentioned my basset hound named Ernie. Thought you might enjoy it. Sincerely, John Guaspari. Blah blah blah. 2 weeks later, I get a postcard from the Miami Herald, and all it said on it was, John, woof, Dave Barry. It's 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 on the wall, 4 feet over from where I'm sitting right. It's one of my prized possessions. I love that. The
That's
entire
awesome.
note was woof. Yeah.
That's awesome. I
But
want to give you one thing to close the episode on.
please.
Over your long, illustrious career, what's your absolute favorite moment of like doing everything?
Whew.
If you had to pick the cherry on top, what's the cherry on top?
In around the year 2000, and in the year 2000, my business partner and I had done about a 2-year consulting project with an insurance company that was based in Keene, New Hampshire. Keene is a little town in the lower left-hand corner of New Hampshire. And when we bid the project, it was just he and I, and you know, and the name of our company was Guaspari and Salz. His name was Nort Salz. And like in the consulting world, you have stringers who you call on for any given project. You reach out and grab. We need 3 people. We need 5. Everybody knows a bunch of people who will help out. So it was a pretty good sized project for us, and we were going up against 2 of the big consulting companies based in Boston, and we were 2 little jabronis in in suburban Boston. And it came down to the final dog and pony show. It was down to 3 of us. And I remember the president of the insurance company said, all right, well, what can you do for us how would you work out a billing for us that's on a contingency basis? That is, our billing would be contingent on measurable results we got for them. And it was a moment where I could feel my heart beating, because I know I was going to say no. I knew I was going to say no, but I couldn't say, no, we don't do that. I had to sound.
Right.
I said, Tom, I'm sorry, we don't work on contingencies. Well, how do we know you have skin in the game? And I remember looking him in the eye and saying, Tom, it's just Nort and I. All we have is our reputation. If we do this work for you and we screw it up, we are screwed. You will have our effort, you will have everything we have, but we will not do this on a contingency basis. And we left, and I remember he and I drove home, my partner and I drove home together, and I said, what do you think? And he said, I'm glad you said that, but I don't know, that might have blown us out of the water. We got a call the next day that we got the job. Fast forward 2 years later, we had done 2 years of work with them. It was a huge success. And they had like a banquet at the end, to like a celebration of the success of what we had done with them. It had involved re-engineering a bunch of their work processes and all that. But first, we had gone out with them and interviewed a bunch of their customers and taught their people how to interview customers, so that it wasn't us coming back. That was another interesting thing. It wasn't us interviewing customers and telling them what customers said. We said, no, you need to go talk to customers. And these are people from backroom functions that didn't talk to customers, because we wanted to get the voice of the customer inculcated throughout the organization, and everybody began to hear it. And one of the things that happened was, so I wrote an article I had a regular monthly space in a business magazine. I wrote an article about the work we had done, and it was blowing smoke at ourselves about what a wonderful job we had done. A year later, I wrote another article that said, a year ago, I wrote an article about this job. Well, here's the postscript. The main thing we had convinced them to do was they had had their claim centers regionally. We had convinced them, no, it made more sense to have one national claim center in Worcester, Massachusetts. And we convinced them, and they did that. About a year later, that claim center burned down. And we had told them, put all your eggs in that basket. But what happened was that the day it happened, the president of the company's got his head in his hands, and he looks up and he's got people from HR, people from accounting, people from facilities, people from non-customer facing functions in his doorway saying, how can we help? Because they had been the people out talking to customers and they recognized how important it was. And he said that within 36 hours, they had adjuster centers, claim center, temporary claim center up and running, and had lost virtually no time. And he said that happened because of the way we had gone about it with them. That was probably the most gratifying thing that, I knew what we had been doing was good work, but the picture through the way he told it, him looking up and seeing all these people in his doorway saying, how can we help? That moment, and I told you they had the big celebration, the big banquet. And yes, this is me patting myself on the back. At the end, they went around and said, we did this, we did that, we accomplished this. Not we, but they had accomplished this, they had accomplished that. And they said, there's a couple of people we'd like to thank. And they said, one is Nort Stalls, that was my business partner. And then they said, the other is John Guaspari. And the place rose and gave me a standing ovation because I had gone around the company and done a seminar for every employee in the company to explain why we were doing what we were doing. And that consulting engagement was the most gratifying thing I ever did in my consulting career.
That's awesome. That makes it all worth
That was the second most important part of my business career. The most important thing was I met my wife at Honeywell.
it. Can't forget that.
No,
You can't.
married to her for 40 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is awesome. Well, John, you've been a great guest, and
Thank you,
I would
Brad.
at some point I would love to have you back on,
Sure.
because you were, like I said, you were great. So I will wrap this up, guys. JohnGuaspari.com. He's got his books. Reach out to him. Again, he's a wealth of knowledge. John, thank you. You were awesome.
Thank
Have
you,
a good
Brad.
night.
You too.